Hi.
Hello everybody. Unbalanced thinking is the subhead, page 255 in the chapter Legalism, Opponent of Christian Freedom. Franz says, by legalistic thinking, a comparatively innocent minor action can be transformed into a major one of great culpability. In life there is need for balance, since the rightness or wrongness of many things really comes down to a matter of degree. As a simple example, a gentle pat with one's hand on another's cheek signifies affection, whereas a strong slap on the cheek tells of anger, even hatred. The action of the hand and fingers is the same in both cases. It is the difference in the degree of force that converts an expression of affection into one of hatred. So too, in more complex aspects, while the element of degree may not enter notably into such clear-cut offenses as murder, a murderer does not slightly kill or moderately kill or strongly kill someone, or theft or adultery, it does play a deciding role in a wide variety of life's affairs. Thus, people commonly work to earn money. This does not, however, justify classing them as greedy. But if the degree of concern for money passes a certain point, then greed is evident. Who can specifically identify that certain point so as to draw a clear line of demarcation, one that divides precisely between the proper and improper concern for gain? It is only when the evidence clearly points to excess that one can feel justified in assessing another as greedy. This is true in a whole host of matters.
Again, in Bible times, the religious leaders failed to exercise such balance, to distinguish between actions of a minor nature and those which might be termed major. Thus, when they saw Jesus' disciples on the Sabbath day picking grains of wheat, rubbing them in their hands to remove the chaff, and eating them, they accused them of violating the Sabbath laws against work. How could they? Because in their unbalanced, extremely scrupulous thinking, the men were, in effect, both harvesting and threshing. Indeed, if they had picked large quantities of grain, loading up their cloaks with the wheat, and then rubbing the chaff off, producing piles of such grain, they would have been doing just that. But they were not. And Jesus reproved the religious leaders for condemning the innocent.
This same unbalanced thinking seems to be the only explanation for the positions taken by the Watchtower organization in a number of the policies already described. Perhaps nothing demonstrates this more forcefully than does the issue of alternative service to be performed in place of military service, and that leads to the next subhead, which is submission to the superior authorities. It's worth, I think, reviewing again, though, that this unbalanced thinking and using texts that exhibit that you're not being very careful with your choice of proof texts or biblical indicators to make your position. In the last one, for instance, and again here, and in the next one, Isaiah 2:4, and its role in deciding whether or not one has violated neutrality and has kept one's integrity. Again, in the context of Isaiah 2, if you just looked at the context in the book itself, you'd realize your problem. In that, as was pointed out in the last segment, Ray nails that this is a prophecy. It's not a law for the present, nor is it even a rule for right conduct by believers. But here, Isaiah 2 is violating, of course, the historical context, as we pointed out in the Humpty Dumpty videos. You go outside the immediate context, which is prophecy, and then you go to the historical context, which is the setting. Was Isaiah saying that Israel should not have swords, and that the right conduct for Israelites during the period of the Old Testament kingdom, that is the kingly rule and the princely rule, and the sovereign nation of Israel did not have the right to have weapons on hand and did not have the right to fight its neighbors, which God clearly never prohibited war in the Old Testament. So to use a rule from the Old Testament about the future is actually a prophecy, is violating both the immediate context in Isaiah and the historical context, but also the larger context. For instance, as we'll get into in the next section, when you're talking about something like Romans 13, where the Watchtower itself has flipped positions about, well, I've lost count, 4 or 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of being submissive to the superior authorities, they've gone back and forth on this, depending on who was president at the time. Rutherford's day, it was thought of, because the kingdom had come already in 1914, that rule of submission to the superior authorities didn't apply anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just looked outside the immediate context, that kingdom now principle is obviously dependent on whether the kingdom actually came in 1914.
But they're also very arbitrary in which verse they pick as the one to make the decision on it. Because if you look at other portions of Scripture and you decided to do that, you'd get the exact reverse application. So if you were to look at the books of Genesis, the life of Joseph, if you were to look at Daniel, the life of Daniel, if you were to look at Esther, you would, and you picked out just something from there.
Like their position in the society.
Yeah, you would get, well, you can work for outside your people. You can be in government.
You can be in government, even in a pagan government?
Yeah, you can even be a magician in false worship.
Daniel, the chief of the Magi. Esther, queen of the king of Persia, the emperor himself.
Yeah.
Joseph, prime minister of Egypt.
Yeah, it's just arbitrary, and it's not really considering the context and the situation. It's just a stated rule, and they base it on one verse.
In the next segment, submission to the superior authorities, one of the most contested and one of the most controversial of all the Watchtower rules. What does submission to superior authorities actually indicate as to correct Christian behaviors? Let's say the acceptance of an alternative service. If you do not want to serve in the military, what should you do if you're ordered by court or by the military itself to accept, under punishment, under threat of punishment, jail time? What should you do? Should you accept alternative service? Now, of course, the governments of this world generally make exception for those whose conscience will not allow them to serve in the military itself. The Watchtower has traditionally rejected such opportunities, and the consequence has been that many of the Watchtower's acolytes have gone to jail. Submission to the superior authorities in the next segment.